Remember the before time? The long, long ago? Back when you could just buy generic Lego bricks and not worry about the hundreds of millions of licensed sets out there? Good times. But on the other hand, if Lego didn't balloon into the massive multimedia franchise it is now, we would never have gotten 2014's hilarious and poignant Lego movie. And after the, let's be serious here, surprisingly quality Phil Lord and Chris Miller production, Warner Brothers is aiming to have lightning strike twice with the Lego Batman movie releasing this week. But let's take this opportunity to look back at the first movie. It did a fantastic job of reminding everyone what it was like to tinker with your toys as a child. Not with Tinker Toys though, with Lego, obviously. It was also a touching reminder to not let that imaginative spirit disappear. And you know what? I can think of another character that shares a very similar set of values. And it might not be who you think, unless you've already seen the title of this video and you know exactly who it is. Of course, we're talking about Buddy the Elf from the 2003 Christmas classic, Elf. Now look, I'll fully admit that it's a little late to be talking about Christmas, even if Christmas is the best. But we've come across a really interesting theory that dives a bit deeper than you might think it would. By connecting many of the similarities between both films, especially the ending of the Lego movie, this theory asks, is it possible that the Lego movie is a secret sequel to Elf? As far as we can tell, this theory was originally developed on Reddit by the users Smoky Sunrise and Itchy Rabbit, and then fully fleshed out by Little Blue 42. And it was so well thought out that we couldn't not talk about it, so let's take a look at this. When I suggest to you that the Lego movie is a sequel to Elf, what's the first major connection between both movies that you can think of? And if you've seen both of them, you're probably going to think, well, it's Will Ferrell, since he plays Buddy the Elf in Elf and also plays Lord Business and the man upstairs in the Lego movie. And if that were the only piece of evidence for this theory, that would be totally lame. But Little Blue 42 has deconstructed both of these characters and came to the conclusion that the man upstairs is actually a very likely future for Buddy the Elf. Now first off, to those of you who haven't seen these movies, who are these characters? Well, first off, Buddy the Elf is a human who was nevertheless raised as an elf in Santa's workshop. Because of his upbringing, when he sets out to forge his own path in modern-day New York City, 2003 New York City, he comes across as an overexcited, childlike ball of Christmas-fueled energy and naivete. And ever since, he's been a mainstay during the holidays, teaching us to never abandon our Christmas spirit. Meanwhile, in the Lego movie, spoilers, the man upstairs is the real-world counterpart to the movie's evil/tyrannical president/lord business. And throughout the movie, the man upstairs is alluded to quite a few times as some sort of all-powerful being. Eventually, in the final act of the movie, we learn that the man upstairs, this all-powerful, all-seeing presence, is actually just the guy that built this massive Lego universe in his basement. He's a regular guy. Although, he's very protective of his creations, and gets upset when he finds his son playing with his Lego unsupervised, ruining the order of the city he built. At this point, we also learn that all the events of the story so far have been cooked up in the mind of the man upstairs' son, who we'll call Finn from now on since that's his name. Okay, with these two characters established, let's get to the evidence that Buddy and the man upstairs are the same person. First off, notice how I'm not calling the man upstairs by any other name? Well, that's because we're never actually told his name, so there's no conflict of having to explain away why the man upstairs' name isn't Buddy because we have no information on that one way or the other. Now, our first big piece of evidence is that Buddy the Elf is shown to be incredibly skilled with Lego from the get-go. We see in the movie Elf that Buddy stays up all night waiting for Santa to visit the department store he's working in. And in that time, he just goes nuts with the decorations. And one of the centerpieces of his massive display is a sizable Lego cityscape of New York City, almost like a prototype of the city that the man upstairs built in the Lego movie. So other than Buddy's apparent skill as a master builder, you can just edit some people booing in here because I'm very proud of that line, even though I probably shouldn't be. This theory goes on to say that after constructing the cityscape, Buddy had a somewhat traumatic encounter with some smelly imposter claiming to be Santa Claus. They then get into a scuffle, and the imposter Santa destroys a whole lot of Buddy's display, including his massive Lego creation. To examine this more closely, Buddy was somewhat lacking in emotional maturity. Since his life in the North North Pole didn't exactly adequately prepare him for the life of an adult human. And Santa was somewhat of a father figure to Buddy, as well as one of the only tethers he had to his old life. So Santa would have been a comfort to him after being so dramatically displaced. With that context in mind, Buddy discovering an imposter Santa who then destroyed all of his Lego creations would be pretty darn traumatic. This experience could have festered with Buddy, and eventually manifested as a desperate desire to see his creations go undisturbed, especially if they were made of something like, I don't know, Lego? And Buddy's supposed trauma of having his creations destroyed gets even more complicated when we bring other people into this scenario. What kind of people? Only the most destructive people in the history of mankind. Those who leave nothing but chaos and destruction and disarray in their wake. Toddlers. This theory raises the pretty good point that Buddy was brought up in the North Pole alongside elves, not humans. And the elves in Elf are depicted as having a natural ability to create, as opposed to humans who have a natural ability to wreck things, especially when they're young. That last point isn't really brought up in Elf, but that's a real life fact. But Buddy would have no way of knowing this, because to our knowledge, other than being one himself at some point, he's never had to look after very young children for any stretch of time. So the theory says when Buddy had kids of his own, he saw their true destructive potential. Since both Buddy the Elf and the man upstairs have a tendency to overreact, just a teeny bit, as well as considering the possible trauma that Buddy endured while seeing his creations destroyed, it isn't unreasonable to think that Buddy might resort to some drastic measures to ensure that his creations aren't destroyed by his own children. Drastic measures like using the super weapon of the Lego movie, Crazy Glue. Craggle. Also, the sheer amount of Lego the man upstairs has is cause for a bit of question. It's not uncommon for people to have a hobby that they're passionate about, but the amount of Lego in this person's house has gotta be thousands of dollars at least. And while there are definitely people who have that kind of money to spend on this, it seems like a bit much for a businessman with at least 2 kids like the man upstairs has. But when you consider that this guy could be Buddy, another possibility makes itself apparent. Sure, tens of thousands of Lego pieces would be a lot to buy on your own, but what if you, theoretically speaking, were in close contact with someone whose entire life revolved around the production and distribution of toys, and also that person was Santa Claus? I feel like he'd be a pretty good source for endless amounts of Lego. It's also established in Elf that Buddy doesn't sleep much. See the previously mentioned scene in Elf where Buddy just goes nuts with the Christmas decorations overnight. Which would also explain how the man upstairs has time to build this massive Lego city. Lastly, what ties this theory together is that in the Lego movie, Lord Business acquires the super weapon Craggle around 8.5 years ago. Coincidentally, 8.5 years appears to be around how old Finn is. After all, when his dad chastises him for playing with the Lego city, Finn comments that Lego is for ages 8 to 14, which would suggest that Finn is at least 8. Not only that, but relative to the release of the Lego movie, 8.5 years would have been around mid-2005, only a couple short years after Elf was released. Yeah, that movie's almost 15 years old, people. That timeline seems to line up with Buddy becoming more protective of his creation, especially around children and toddlers. So, with everything we've already examined, does it still seem that crazy to think that Buddy the Elf and the man upstairs are the same person? Okay, so a couple things worth addressing here. And we'll start with one of the questions that came about during this theory's development, which is, if this theory is to be believed, why is Lord Business such a villainous stereotype when compared to Buddy the Elf? And this question actually has a pretty simple answer. Lord Business isn't a perfect representation of the man upstairs. He's just a symbol created by Finn to vent his frustrations about his father. When we finally do meet the man upstairs, he's portrayed as a pretty reasonable person. After he overreacts to Finn messing up his Lego creation, he changes his tune pretty quickly, especially after realizing that Lord Business is the bad guy in Finn's mind. In the end, there's nothing that malicious about the man upstairs. In fact, by the end, he seems like a pretty cool guy. But there's also one tiny element in the Lego movie that has huge implications for this theory. During the final act of the Lego movie, our hero up to this point, Emmett, is rendered unable to move since he crossed through the interdimensional portal into the real world. Of course, in the real world, Emmett is just a normal Lego construction worker. And these story details only exist in Finn's mind. And yet, Emmett is able to force himself to move through sheer willpower? By the movie's own logic, this shouldn't be possible, so what's going on here? Well, both Elf and the Lego Movie have their own versions of some sort of otherworldly force that brings people together. These two things are the Christmas spirit and the special, respectively. In Elf, we're shown that the Christmas spirit can do amazing things, not the least of which is power Santa's sleigh. But maybe it isn't just purely Christmas spirit. Maybe what's called Christmas spirit in Elf is more of a general, genuine, childlike enthusiasm for things like creativity, adventure, or imagination, which kids like Finn, or perpetually optimistic adults like Buddy, would be more likely to have. If this is the case, maybe the special is just Finn's interpretation of these kinds of ideas. And in this Elf/Lego movie universe, this mindset just happens to come with certain magical properties that are elevated around Christmas time as more people get into the Christmas spirit. With this idea in mind, there are two ways you can interpret Emmett's movement. One way to look at it is to assume that Finn essentially gave life to all of these Lego figures through the power of will, and that both stories in the Lego movie are all equally as real to the characters involved. But there's another way to interpret this as well. Maybe Finn's Christmas spirit, or special, or shining, or whatever you want to call this power, actually manifested itself as some sort of telekinesis, moving Emmett around seemingly on his own. We already know that Christmas spirit powers Santa's sleigh, so the precedent definitely exists. And when you add to the fact that this was a moment of desperation, when the man upstairs was gluing everything together, it seems possible that Finn may have had a spike in his beliefs, allowing him to move Emmett seemingly on his own. Meanwhile, the point about the man upstairs getting his Lego from Santa doesn't really seem to hold up, since Finn says that some of the Lego sets were bought at the toy store, implying that he was around when the Lego was bought. Not only that, but it also suggests that he was around and remembers times where this cityscape was under construction. That said, the man upstairs creation takes up pretty much his entire basement, so this would have taken a really long time, obviously. But if he and Buddy the Elf are the same, why wasn't he able to construct the city as quickly as he was able to build things in Elf? Would it be due to his lack of Christmas spirit, which would also affect the speed and enthusiasm he has while creating? Of course, with all of this talk about Christmas spirit, there is one question among others left over. Why would Buddy lose this power when he's fully aware of the existence of the most fantastical things? There's the possibility that it was due to the pressures of work, presumably at the publishing company his father Walter founded, as well as the stress of parenting, which would cause him to lose sight of things like his childlike imagination. And in Elf, we have a character that went through a very similar arc. Buddy's biological father Walter, played by James Caan, actually kinda sets a precedent for this theory. He's a grump who works in publishing, and the stress of both his job and parenting his children contribute to his lack of Christmas spirit, which is then reinvigorated by the end of the film. But there is something else that could explain why Buddy's Christmas spirit has waned even though he's aware of the most amazing things. Because they're not that amazing to him. Things like Santa and the Christmas spirit have been a constant presence his whole life. He's just used to these things and no longer finds any excess joy in them. This process of habituation is common in humans and can be applied to almost anything. Psychologically speaking, habituation is the decrease in response to certain stimuli. The more someone is exposed to something, the more likely they are to just tune that thing out as other things require more attention. Buddy's life in the North Pole may seem novel to us because we're average people, but to someone who was actually raised in that environment, our world would actually be way more interesting and fantastical to them. It's kind of like when you hear a new pop song and you're like, oh, that's pretty catchy, but then like it gets stuck in your head and like it just takes over your entire being, and then you're like, how long has this song been around? And then you realize it's only been like a week, but then the song gets super popular and you start hearing it on every radio station and playlist without giving it a second thought. That is habituation in action. And if our theory is to be believed, it appears to explain why Buddy would have lost the Christmas spirit or the special. He's just grown accustomed to the incredible life he's led and doesn't find it all that incredible anymore. Alright, so we've taken a look at both of these characters at length. And while we know a great deal about one of them, the other one leaves a lot of gaps blank, which makes sense since we only spend a few minutes of screen time with the man upstairs. But after this look, it's really cool to think that the Lego Movie could very well be Buddy the Elf being reminded by his own son about the wonders of the imagination, followed by Buddy reclaiming his belief in both the Christmas spirit and his childlike wonder as a whole. And that sequence of events makes the Lego Movie an even better coming-of-age story than it already was, especially for those of us that are surly misanthropic adults who just wear permanent scowls on our faces and trudge through life on autopilot, just wondering where it all went wrong. That got away from me and was also super depressing, so here are some cute puppies to lighten the mood. The question now is, will this add any depth to the Lego Batman movie? Who knows? None of us expected the Lego movie to take the turn that it did, so who can predict how the Lego Batman movie will turn out? But either way, this theory adds a great layer to both Elf and the Lego movie, and it makes me want to rewatch both of them, over and over again, for the rest of my life, and I'm only exaggerating a little bit. With that in mind, I'm going to rate the conspiracy of the Lego movie being a secret sequel to Elf 4 scribble-faced good cops out of 5 bad cops. But what do you think? Do you think there's a connection between the Lego movie and Elf? Do you plan on seeing the Lego Batman movie? And what was your favorite toy to build things with as a kid, whether it was Lego or Tinker Toys or K'NEX? I mean, Lego was a close second, but I can't be the only K'NEX kid out there, right? There must be others, right? Be sure to send us your thoughts in the comments below, and also make sure you send us any conspiracies you'd like us to take a look at. Until then, don't forget to like this video, and if this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe to ChannelFrederator for all sorts of awesome stuff, including more cartoon conspiracies. And remember, Frederator loves you.